The night she threw me out into the rain. I had nothing, no money, no family, not even dry clothes. But what they didn't know is that I'd come back. Stronger. Smarter. And I wouldn't knock when I returned, because the house would be mine. Stay with me, and I'll show you how I went from being the forgotten girl in the storm to the woman who quietly took everything back. The first time I saw Diane, she was wearing my mother's favorite color. Our conversations were reduced to a series of nods and soft grunts. I thought maybe he needed time. So I waited. And waited. Then Diane moved in. She didn't come gradually, as someone might, who respects the space left behind by a loved one. No, she arrived like a summer storm. Fast, loud, and impossible to ignore. She smiled too wide, spoke too loudly, and decorated our home with things that felt foreign. The floral wallpaper came down. My mother's old teacups were boxed and stored away. The house started to smell like her perfume, sharp and artificial, like roses dipped in vinegar. "Isabel, you should start calling me Dee," she said on her second day. "It's what everyone calls me. Much more friendly." I wanted to scream. My mother had barely been gone half a year, and someone else was already trying to erase her. But I didn't scream. I smiled, the way good girls are taught to, and nodded. "Okay, Dee." She wasn't cruel at first. Just cold. Distant. Like I was a guest she tolerated, but didn't quite like. She praised my manners in front of neighbors, but never once said goodnight. She hosted dinner parties for her church friends and left me to eat alone in the kitchen. It wasn't what she did that hurt most, it was what she took away. The first time I noticed the change in my father, I was doing homework at the kitchen table. Diane walked in and sighed. "Izzy, couldn't you do that in your room? I'm expecting company." My father didn't even glance up from his newspaper. "Izzy, go to your room." He never used to call me that, not Izzy. It was always Isabel, said with affection, sometimes even sung like a lullaby. But now it sounded like an order, like I was one of the dogs. The walls closed in slowly. Diane took over chores, but only assigned them to me. She made snide comments about my clothes, my hair, my quietness. "Girls your age should be more put together," she'd say with a sneer. She enrolled her daughter from a previous marriage, Sarah, into my school and dressed her in boutique outfits while I wore hand-me-downs from secondhand stores. At school, people noticed. Teachers asked if everything was okay at home. I said yes. I always said yes, because I still thought I could fix it, that if I was good enough, polite enough, maybe Diane would warm up to me. Maybe my father would remember how things used to be. Maybe love would find its way back. But love, I learned, is not always stronger than grief. And grief, when left untended, can be the most fertile ground for forgetfulness. There was a moment, a small one, but unforgettable, when I realized my father had truly begun to replace my mother. We were having dinner. Diane cooked some fancy quiche that tasted like cardboard. My father laughed at her joke, something about wine and bishops, and reached across the table to touch her hand. That was the first time I saw him smile since my mother died. Not at me. Not with me. But at her. I excused myself from the table, went upstairs, and closed the door. I didn't cry. Not that night. I just stared at the ceiling and whispered to the darkness, "Don't forget her. Please, don't forget her." But he already had. And in his forgetfulness, I began to disappear. By the time Diane had been with us for 6 months, she'd turned our house into her kingdom. My mother's photographs were taken down, stored in a plastic bin in the attic. Her hummingbird feeder, once perched outside our kitchen window, was thrown out and replaced with a copper wind chime that clanged incessantly. Even the air felt different, sterile, silent, like the house was holding its breath. Diane's daughter, Sarah, came to live with us that spring. She was a year older than me and carried herself like royalty. With her polished shoes, manicured nails, and condescending glances, she fit right into the new world Diane was building. Sarah called Diane Mom in front of my father, and he beamed. I still called her Diane, though I tried once to say Dee just to fit in. The word tasted wrong in my mouth, and Diane responded with a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. I started noticing how invisible I had become. Family dinners were quieter now, not because no one talked, but because no one talked to me. I'd try to add something to the conversation, and Diane would cut in, redirect, or smile with polite disinterest. Sarah would roll her eyes, and my father would keep chewing, unbothered. One Saturday morning, I brought home a certificate from school. I'd won first place in an essay contest about resilience. I thought maybe, just maybe, this would be the moment he saw me again. "That's nice, Isabel," he said, without looking up from his laptop. Diane took the certificate, read the title aloud, and said, a bit dramatic, don't you think?" My face burned. I mumbled something about going upstairs. The certificate ended up in the trash that evening. There were chores, of course. Lots of them. Diane handed me a list every Sunday night. Scrub the floors. Weed the garden. Wash Sarah's laundry. Clean the garage. At first, I thought it was her way of integrating me. But then I noticed Sarah never had a list. "She has advanced classes," Diane said when I asked. "You should be thankful you can contribute in your own way." When I told my father, he shrugged. "She's trying to teach you discipline. Be grateful." Gratitude. That word started to feel like a curse. I was supposed to be grateful for being ignored. Grateful for the leftovers. Grateful for being told my hair was messy and my posture slouched. The turning point came during a PTA event. Each parent-child pair was asked to bring something homemade. I baked cookies, a recipe from my mom's old notebook. Diane made red velvet cupcakes with Sarah. "Don't put your cookies out," Diane said before we left. "They're a bit rustic and we want to make a good impression." So I sat there all night, watching people compliment Sarah and Diane, while my cookies stayed wrapped in foil in my bag. I gave them to a homeless man on our way home. He said they were the best cookies he'd ever had. That night, I stared into the bathroom mirror, trying to find traces of the girl I used to be, the one who used to be loved. My father stopped saying goodnight. He stopped asking how my day was. I became a background character in my own life. And in that silence, I started to retreat into myself, not as a way of coping, but as a way of surviving. There was no storm. No dramatic confrontation. Just the slow, agonizing realization that I wasn't wanted. Not by her. Not by him. Maybe not by anyone. It happened on a Sunday morning. The kind of Sunday that used to smell like cinnamon rolls and sound like old Motown playing on the radio. But not anymore. Diane had outlawed sugar in the mornings and deemed Motown too distracting. The kitchen was silent now, like a church no one visited. I had forgotten to take the trash out the night before. A simple mistake. But when I walked downstairs and Diane saw the overflowing bin, she acted as though I had set the house on fire. "Isabel," she hissed, not shouted. Never shouted. Her voice was always cold, contained, lethal. "Do you think we live in a dump? Do you think that's acceptable?" "I'm sorry," I said immediately, reaching for the trash bag. "I forgot. I'll do it right now." She stepped forward and slapped me. The sound echoed louder than it should have. My cheek stung, but what hurt more was the look of pure disdain on her face. Like I wasn't even a person, just a nuisance she couldn't wait to dispose of. I stood there, frozen. It wasn't just the slap. It was what followed. Robert was standing in the doorway. He had seen the whole thing. And he did nothing. No gasp. No anger. Not even a frown. Just a tired sigh, as if the whole scene inconvenienced him. "Next time, listen to your mother," he muttered before walking away. Your mother. She wasn't my mother. She never would be. After that day, something shifted inside me. I stopped trying. Stopped smiling. Stopped asking questions. I became efficient, obedient, but hollow. A machine. And Diane noticed. She stopped pretending, too. Her jabs became sharper, more frequent. "You'll never amount to anything, you know that?" she'd say as I scrubbed the floor. Or, "Sarah is the real daughter I never had." Sarah laughed at everything Diane said. She soaked in the attention like sunlight. Once, I overheard her tell a friend on the phone, "Izzy's basically like the maid, but moodier." I wrote about it in my journal. pages and pages of thoughts I never dared to say aloud. Anger.
Shame. Fear.
But also one more thing: resolve.
I didn't know how. I didn't know when.
But I knew one day I'd get out. And when I did, they would never make me feel this small again. One afternoon, Diane had friends over. Church women. Polished, smiling, all pearls and perfume. Diane had me serve them lemonade and cookies like a waitress. "Such a sweet girl," one of the ladies said. Diane laughed. "Oh, she's a work in progress. But at least she's useful." I looked at my father. He was pouring tea. Laughing. I could have screamed. Instead, I poured the lemonade, one glass at a time, and I smiled. Because somewhere deep inside, a voice whispered, "They think you're weak.
Let them.
They won't see you coming." The slap wasn't the beginning. It wasn't even the worst. But it was the day I stopped believing my father would ever come back. That night, I stood in the mirror and held my face. The redness was fading, but the memory wouldn't. I looked myself in the eyes and whispered, "Remember this." Not in anger, but as a promise. It started like most things in that house, with something small. A chipped vase. It had been sitting on a narrow hallway table for as long as I could remember. I wasn't even the one who knocked it over. Sarah did, while texting and walking. But when Diane heard the crash, she came running, heels tapping like gunshots on the hardwood floor. And Sarah, with the poise of a practiced liar, simply pointed at me. Izzy wasn't watching where she was going. Diane's eyes locked on me like crosshairs. Of course it was you." I tried to explain, my voice cracking, but Diane's face was already a mask of contempt. Robert arrived a moment later. Diane held up the broken ceramic like it was a murder weapon. "Look at what she's done. Again. I can't live like this, Robert." "I won't." He looked at the shards, then at me. And I could see it. He didn't care about the truth. He just wanted peace.
Silence.
Obedience. "I think it's time," Diane whispered. He hesitated. For half a breath. Then nodded. I remember the sound of the rain outside. It had started pouring just minutes earlier. Diane packed a bag for me, one small duffel.
No jacket. No warm clothes.
Just a few folded shirts, a pair of jeans, and a toothbrush. She placed the bag at my feet like it was a gift. Robert didn't say much. He stood in the foyer with his hands in his pockets, eyes fixed on a spot above my head. "You'll stay with someone else for a while," he said.
"Who?"
He didn't answer. "You're my dad," I whispered. "Please don't make me go." His jaw clenched. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be." Diane opened the door. Wind and rain swept in like judgment. "Goodbye, Isabel," she said, smiling with satisfaction. "Try not to get anything wet." I stepped out without a coat. The bag thudded against my leg. I walked into the storm because there was nowhere else to go. No one had been called. No arrangements had been made. I realized then, this wasn't temporary. They were done with me. I made it 2 blocks before the cold soaked through my clothes. My shoes squelched with each step. I ducked into an alley behind an old hardware store and curled into myself, shivering under a rotting fire escape. At some point, I must have passed out. My head throbbed, and my fingers were stiff and blue when I opened my eyes. The rain had stopped, but everything was still wet. I felt hollow, not sad, not scared, just empty. I pulled the small photograph from my bag, the one of me and Mom in the garden. She had daisies in her hair. I stared at it, willing her to speak, to give me a sign, anything. And that's when I considered ending it. There was a bridge just a few blocks away. I remembered the stories people told. How easy it was to climb over. How no one would stop you. I stood. My legs wobbled. I walked. But fate, or maybe mercy, intervened. A voice called out from behind me.
"Hey."
"Hey, child." I turned slowly. A woman in a gray coat was jogging toward me. White hair tied in a bun. Concern in her eyes. "Sweetheart, are you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." I said nothing. She stepped closer. Then softer, as if approaching a deer in the woods. My name is Eleanor. I live just down the street.
You don't have to talk.
But would you like some soup? It's warm. And I won't ask questions unless you want me to. I should have run.
Said no.
Kept walking. But something about her voice, low, calm, motherly, unlocked something in me I didn't even realize I still had.
Hope.
So I nodded and followed her home. That was the night I was kicked out of one house and led to the doorstep of the one that would save me. Eleanor's house smelled like cinnamon and chamomile. The scent hit me the moment I stepped inside, and I almost collapsed again, not from exhaustion, but from the overwhelming warmth of it. It reminded me of my mother, not just the smell, but the quiet calm, the lived-in furniture, the gentle clutter of someone who has loved and lost and chosen to keep going. She handed me a towel and a set of warm flannel pajamas. I stood frozen in her hallway, dripping rainwater onto the hardwood floor. Bathroom's down the hall, she said kindly. There's a heater in there. Take your time. I didn't speak. I just nodded and obeyed, my limbs aching with each movement. The mirror in the bathroom showed a ghost. Pale face, hollow eyes, wet hair plastered to my cheeks. I peeled off my soaked clothes and slid into the pajamas. They smelled like cedar and safety. When I returned to the kitchen, a bowl of steaming soup waited on the table. Homemade chicken and rice, the kind with real vegetables and thyme. I ate slowly, every spoonful thawing something frozen inside me. Eleanor sat across from me, not prying. She sipped tea and knitted, her movements rhythmic and unhurried. When I finally spoke, my voice came out cracked and small. My name's Isabel. She looked up and smiled. It's a beautiful name. I stared down at my bowl. They called me Izzy. But I don't think I like that name anymore.
Then don't use it, she said simply.
You're allowed to choose who you want to be. That night, she made up the guest room with fresh sheets and left the door cracked open. If you need anything, she said, I'll be in the room down the hall. I lay in the bed staring at the ceiling for hours. My mind replayed everything. Diane's slap, Sarah's smirk, Robert's silence. My chest ached with confusion and sorrow. But underneath it all, there was something new, stillness. I didn't feel like I had to hold my breath anymore. No footsteps echoing with judgment. No whispered critiques behind closed doors. Just the ticking of an old clock and the sound of a house that didn't hate me. In the morning, Eleanor had already made oatmeal and toast. She placed a hand on my shoulder as I sat. Not forceful. Just enough to say, you matter. Over the next few days, I slept a lot, ate quietly, didn't speak unless spoken to, and Eleanor didn't push. She gave me space but remained near, watering her plants, feeding the cat, humming softly while she dusted the shelves. Every so often, she'd glance my way and offer a smile that made something in my chest loosen. One evening, we sat on the porch, watching the sky melt into pink and gold. I hadn't said much all day, but as the sun dipped below the horizon, I whispered, they didn't even ask where I was going. Eleanor didn't answer immediately. She let the silence breathe before replying. Some people can't see what's right in front of them, or they choose not to. I looked at her. Do you think I'm broken? She turned fully to face me.
No.
I think you're bruised. There's a difference. Bruises fade. Broken things, well, they can be mended, too. But it takes time. And love. And then she did something no one had done in so long. I couldn't remember when. She opened her arms. I hesitated for just a second. Then I let myself fall into the hug. It wasn't dramatic. No tears or sobs. Just warmth.
Safety.
The kind of hug where you don't have to hold yourself up anymore. The kind that says you're not alone now. In her arms, something inside me cracked, not from pain, but from release. I didn't cry that night, but I slept like I hadn't in years. That was the first night I felt like maybe I belong somewhere again. Not as a guest, but as a person worth staying for. Eleanor never asked for details. She didn't push for confessions or explanations. Instead, she offered structure, quietly, steadily. And structure, I learned, is sometimes the kindest form of care. She enrolled me in the local public high school using her address, bought me a pair of new sneakers and a backpack without asking what happened to the old ones. I didn't know how to say thank you in a way that felt big enough, so I started waking up early to help around the house, washing dishes, sweeping the porch, learning to cook more than just box macaroni. In the classroom, I didn't stand out. I wasn't loud or funny or particularly brilliant, but I listened hard, and I wrote essays, poems, answers to questions no one else bothered with. I found a quiet pride in doing things right, in submitting homework on time, in getting the highest score on a test, even if no one noticed but me. Eleanor noticed. "You like numbers," she said one afternoon, watching me balance her checkbook with an intensity that made her chuckle. "I like patterns," I said. "They make sense." She nodded. "Then maybe you'll make them work for you one day." That idea stuck with me. In my junior year, I found a used book on personal finance at the school library. It was written for adults, dense with jargon, but I read it twice. Then again. I started watching free investment tutorials on the public computer after school. I'd scribble notes on compound interest and stock diversification in the margins of my history binder. Eleanor didn't mock it. She encouraged it. She even let me open a tiny savings account with the cash I made from tutoring other kids. "You're building something," she said, handing me $20 for mowing the lawn. "It's slow work, but it lasts." I stopped being afraid of mirrors. I stopped shrinking in hallways. I started speaking in full sentences again. People at school began to notice me, not in a popular way, but in a reliable way. Teachers trusted me with projects. Classmates asked for help on assignments. I joined the math team. I wrote a personal essay that won a statewide contest. It was about survival, not in the dramatic, cinematic sense, but in the slow, daily decision to keep going, to keep choosing life. By senior year, I had applied to 6 colleges. Eleanor helped me write my application essays. We sat together at the kitchen table, reworking phrases until they rang true. I didn't want to lie. I didn't want to write a sob story. I just wanted to tell the truth and be seen. And somehow it worked. I got a full scholarship to a university 4 hours away. When the letter came, Eleanor cried. I didn't. I just sat on the couch holding the envelope like it was a flame I was too scared to let go of. "I knew you'd go far," she said. "I just didn't know it would feel like losing something and gaining something all at once." The night before I left, I asked her why she'd taken me in. "You reminded me of someone," she said. "But you became yourself. And that's what I love most." I didn't sleep much that night. I packed and repacked. I stood in the kitchen at 2 a.m. eating toast with butter and honey, the way she made it when I first came. I memorized the feel of the walls, the sound of her slippers on the tile, the scent of lavender sachets tucked into dresser drawers. When I left, she hugged me tight and whispered, "Keep building." And so I did. College was hard in the beginning. I had imposter syndrome so loud it felt like a second heartbeat. But every time I thought about quitting, I remembered Eleanor's voice. I remembered that night in the alley. The bridge I never reached. The soup. The hug. And I kept going. One class became 2. A semester became a year. And then, slowly, something more than survival began to bloom. Ambition. Not to prove anything to Diane. Not even to Robert. Just to prove something to the girl I used to be. The one who had been left behind, and who kept walking anyway. I graduated with honors. It still feels strange to say that out loud. A girl who once slept under a fire escape walked across a stage in a navy cap and gown to the sound of clapping hands and distant cheers. Eleanor sat in the front row, wearing a blue scarf that matched my tassel, eyes misty with pride. I had studied finance and economics, specializing in market psychology. While other students spent their weekends partying, I interned at a local investment firm and took extra online courses in real estate. Numbers spoke a language I could trust. They didn't lie. They didn't change the rules halfway through. They rewarded discipline, foresight, and patience, 3 things I had mastered by necessity. By the time I was 25, I had built a modest portfolio, stocks, small rental properties. and a few clever flips of foreclosed homes. I reinvested everything,
Lived simply.
drove a used car, ate cheap. I didn't chase luxury. I chased freedom. It was freedom I thought about when I drove back to my hometown that October. Not nostalgia. Not closure. Just curiosity. Eleanor had asked to visit an old friend and suggested we take the weekend to do it. I agreed. It had been years since I'd walked those streets, and something inside me needed to see them again with different eyes. We passed my old school, the diner where I used to hide during lunch breaks, and finally, inevitably, the neighborhood where Robert and Diane still lived. Eleanor was driving when I saw the sign. For sale by owner. It was staked into the front yard like a confession. I told Eleanor to stop the car. There it was. The house. Smaller than I remembered. The paint was chipped. The windows were clouded. The garden Diane used to obsess over was now a patch of yellowing weeds. The weight in my chest was not grief. It wasn't even anger. It was something colder. Calmer. Like the moment before a chess piece is moved. I pulled out my phone. It took less than a day to get in touch with the listing agent. I didn't use my real name. I had a holding company set up for investments just like this. Clean, anonymous, legal. I made an offer below asking, knowing they were desperate. The home had been listed for over 6 months. No bites. They accepted within 2 hours. Eleanor didn't ask why I wanted it. She just looked at me and said, "You don't have to prove anything."
I'm not proving, I said. I'm reclaiming.
We didn't speak about it again. Not until the paperwork was signed and I held the deed in my hand. It felt like holding a loaded key. I stood outside the house 2 weeks later, watching as the sun dipped low, casting gold across the broken shingles. I hadn't told Robert or Diane. They still lived there, unaware. I had given them 30 days' notice through the property management firm. They probably thought it was some investor from out of town. They had no idea the new owner had once slept in the attic, had once been dragged down those stairs by the wrist. I wasn't planning to show up in person. I thought I could let it be enough, the quiet justice of ownership. But something inside me refused to let them leave without seeing me one last time. Not the girl who cried when they turned their backs. The woman who had built herself from those ashes. I would not scream. I would not gloat. I would stand and let them see who I became without them. I didn't knock. I walked through the front door at exactly 4 p.m. on a Thursday, the day before their 30-day notice expired. I wanted them to have enough time to believe this was still their home, right up until the moment they realized it wasn't. The hallway looked smaller. The paint was peeling at the edges, and the framed photographs that once adorned the walls had been taken down, leaving faint outlines of what used to be. The whole house felt like it was trying to forget itself. I heard voices in the kitchen. I followed them. Diane was sitting at the table, flipping through a stack of unpaid bills. Her hair was grayer, shorter, her lips thinner. Stress had carved lines into her face like weather on stone. Robert sat across from her, staring at his coffee like it owed him answers. He looked older, too, shrunk into himself. Wrapped in a cardigan, he wouldn't have been caught dead in 10 years ago. Diane looked up first. Her eyes flicked over me with confusion, then narrowed. "Can we help you?" she asked, her tone clipped. I didn't answer. I stepped forward and placed the manila folder on the table. "What is this?" Robert asked, picking it up with shaking fingers. The silence stretched as he read the deed. He whispered. "You bought the house?" "Yes," I said simply. Diane snorted, an ugly sound. "That's impossible. You came into money?" "Married rich." "I built something," I replied.
Piece by piece.
Quietly, while you weren't looking. She laughed then. "You're lying. This is a joke." "It's not. I'm calling our lawyer." "You're welcome to," I said. "But the paperwork is clean. I gave you notice. You've had time." Robert was still staring at the folder like it might turn to dust. "Why would you?" I looked at him. Really looked. And for the first time, I didn't see my father. I saw a man who had made choices. Who had looked away when it mattered most. Who had called silence love and absence protection. "I wanted to see it," I said. I wanted to see the place that tried to erase me. I wanted to stand here and know it didn't win. Diane stood up. You can't just walk in here and… I interrupted. Because it's mine now. Sarah came down the stairs, phone in hand, confused by the tension. When she saw me, her brows knitted. Who are you? Diane answered for me, her voice tight. No one. I'm the girl you pushed out into the rain, I said, meeting Sarah's eyes. The one you all pretended never existed. There was a beat of silence. Then Sarah scoffed. Whatever. Enjoy this dump. Diane tried one last time. Isabel, please. We have nowhere to go. I didn't smile. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I simply said, you had 30 days to figure that out. I had 10 years. Robert stood, his voice hoarse. What do you want? Nothing, I said. I didn't come to take anything. I came to give you something. The same feeling you gave me when you told me to leave. That feeling of not belonging. Of knowing the door behind you is closed for good. No one followed me as I turned to leave. No one begged again. No one called my name. And that, more than anything, was the real victory. I stepped out onto the porch and took a long breath. The wind smelled like coming rain. But this time, I had a coat, and I wasn't afraid. I didn't look back. Not once. Not at the peeling paint. Not at the door that once slammed shut behind me. Not at the people who had taught me that home could be a battlefield. I walked down the steps and onto the sidewalk, each stride steady, each breath deeper than the last. The weight that had lived on my chest for over a decade lifted, not all at once, but enough that I felt the difference. Like a phantom limb finally acknowledged. For years, I had imagined that moment, fantasized about it really, screaming, shouting, tearing the curtains from the rods. Demanding answers, apologies, validation. But when it finally came, there was nothing left to scream. The silence was louder, sharper, more dignified. The next day, a moving truck arrived. Not for me.
For them.
They left in the rain. Diane huddled under an umbrella. Robert moving slowly. A man collapsed inward. Sarah didn't even show up. I watched from across the street in a parked car, anonymous. Detached. They didn't know I was there. They didn't look around as they left. They just faded, one box at a time, into someone else's ending. I didn't move into the house. I never intended to. I had the locks changed, the walls repainted, the floor stripped and stained. I hired a restoration crew to preserve the shell but remove the rot. I wasn't reclaiming it to relive the past. I was transforming it so it couldn't hurt anyone else again. A few weeks later, I leased it to a nonprofit that provided transitional housing for women and children escaping domestic abuse. Eleanor helped me furnish it with warmth, secondhand couches, colorful blankets, bookshelves lined with stories of survival and strength. We placed fresh flowers in the windowsills. I never told the tenants whose house it used to be. They didn't need that story. They had their own. Sometimes, I'd stop by to fix a squeaky hinge or replace a broken smoke detector. And every so often, a child would run past me in the hallway, laughing. Knowing that the house was no longer haunted. A year later, I sat with Eleanor on the porch of her home, our home. The late summer sun stretched long across the yard. We drank iced tea and listened to the breeze stir the wind chimes. Do you regret it? She asked, not looking at me. Buying the house?
No.
Going back? I thought about it, really thought. And then I shook my head. No, I said, because I didn't go back for them. I went back for her, for the girl I used to be, the one who walked away in the rain thinking she had no worth. I went back to tell her she was wrong. Eleanor nodded, her eyes soft. She'd be proud of you. I hope so. We sat there in silence for a while. The kind of silence that heals instead of hurts. The kind that doesn't need to be filled. And in that moment, I realized I had finally done the one thing I thought was impossible. I had walked away from them. And I had come home to myself. In the years that followed, life didn't turn into a fairy tale. There were no grand celebrations, no perfect endings. But there was peace. There was purpose. And there was love, the kind that doesn't announce itself loudly but lingers in the quiet moments, like steam rising from a morning cup of tea. Eleanor and I lived in a modest house with creaky floors and a garden that refused to grow in neat rows. We made it ours. She knitted scarves with soft yarn and left notes for me on the fridge. Don't forget lunch.
Proud of you.
I hung wind chimes outside her window and planted sunflowers that never quite stood straight but always turned toward the light. I worked in finance. Yes, but I also taught. At a community college.
Part-time.
Because I wanted to help people understand the world of numbers the way I had learned it, as a language of choice, freedom, and rebuilding. I used my earnings to support shelters, mentorship programs, and scholarships for girls who reminded me of the version of myself that once believed silence was strength. Sometimes, I still visited the house I once bought back. Not often. Just enough to check the paint, the locks, the laughter inside. The women there came and went, each with stories that echoed pain, but also resilience. I never introduced myself as anything more than the property manager, because the story wasn't about me anymore. One afternoon, I stood in the hallway there as a little girl ran past me, dragging a stuffed rabbit missing one eye. She looked up at me, grinned, and said, "Want to see my room? It's pink." I followed her down the hall to a space filled with drawings and fairy lights. On the wall was a crayon scrawl that read, "My safe place." And for the first time in a long time, I cried. Not because I was sad, but because something broken had become something whole. Not perfect, but real. That night, I returned home to Eleanor. She was dozing in her chair, a blanket across her lap and a book slipping from her hand. I sat beside her, took the book gently, and whispered, "You saved me." She didn't open her eyes, but she smiled, and I knew she'd heard. Sometimes people ask me if I ever forgave Robert or Diane, and the truth is I stopped needing to. Forgiveness, I learned, is not always about letting them off the hook. Sometimes, it's just about letting yourself walk free. I never got the apology, never heard the words I once begged for, but I don't need them anymore, because I have built a life where my voice matters, where my presence is not a burden but a blessing, where silence is no longer a punishment but a choice. And in the quiet corners of that life, I've discovered something I never expected to find.
Peace.
Not the kind that forgets, but the kind that remembers and heals anyway.